tell her that we all love her and that we'll keep her safe and that we're super proud of her in the way that she's dealt with the journey that we've been on, and that she's been an amazing mum to me and my brothers, and that we love her very, very dearly. That's what I'd say to her.
So if my mum was here, I would want to let her know that we love her, that we understand, that we, I think the most important thing is that we know that this is not her fault, and that as a family, we'll do everything we can to support her and be there for her and hang on to the memories of what it was like before this happened. That's what I'd say to her.
Yeah, and action.
I think for me, my first memory was my mum. Oh God, here we go. Not normally emotional. My first memories, I guess, is my mum's just very capable woman. You know, I had quite an international upbringing. We lived around the world, and she just got on and dealt with whatever she needed to, whether it was driving in the States or in Europe. She was the matriarch of the family. She was just great company. A great mum.
So mine was when I was about 6, so my mum and dad built our family home by hand. And they bought land off my grandma, and literally I just watched the two of them as a team just doing something amazing, part of which was raking an acre of field with then sowing seeds, and I just remember doing that with my mum and just learning really what hard work looks like, you know, being a really good role model, somebody that just loved the family and just really worked hard for us as children.
I think one of the interesting things now, reflecting back on childhood, I spend a lot of my time now, especially weekends, running around after my mother because she can't drive anymore. So picking her up, taking her to places, making sure she's getting out of the house. And you think back to your childhood when, you know, Wednesday was riding lessons, Saturday was more riding lessons, Thursday was tennis. You know, there was something probably after school every day. And particularly in my teenage years in Brussels, you know, Mum used to run us around everywhere. I used to want to go shopping at the weekend. She'd have to take me to the tram stop to get the tram into the centre of town. And she was just always there. But she and my dad had an amazing relationship, and they were always great fun to be around.
Memories for me, very similar. So my mum was always very physically active. She was a tennis player, was playing tennis right up until the last couple of years really, and even when she was diagnosed with dementia, her friends were still taking her out to play tennis, although she was obviously not really able to do what she used to do. We used to play badminton in the garden, we had a badminton net. Yeah, you know, similar to your mum really, she was just a really strong mother who, you didn't really know it, but the family did centre around her.
Yeah, yes. You don't realise it until you look back.
I sort of, you think it's the dad, don't you? But actually, it was my mum that kind of kept the wheels turning, you know, kind of the person that definitely kept the family ticking over. Do you remember the time when you realised something was slightly different with your mum?
Yeah, I think it's, as you'll know, it's quite a gradual process at the start. And, you know, so I'm in Cheshire, she was living in Yorkshire by now. My father had passed away a good few years before, and on, you know, regularly be in telephone contact. And I suppose it's the classic, you know, telling you things twice, asking you the same questions. And then it was really that classic sign of dementia that just was progressively getting worse. And that was the first time that I sort of noticed it and I guess raised it with my brothers. How about, what was it like for you?
So my dad sadly had a stroke 10 years ago, well, a bit longer now, 14 years ago. So my mum was my dad's carer. And it was probably 2019, middle of 2019, I had a phone call from my dad to say, there's something not quite right with your mum. She's looking for her mum, my grandma. What do I do? And I said, is she dreaming? You know, and you kind of go through the kind of normal process. And that was like an episode, and it seemed to subside. And then end of 2019, as she always did, she asked us what we wanted for Christmas. And I remember saying to her, I really like these glasses from Next, wine glasses. There was a set of them. And she just couldn't get her head around how to order them. And then when she did order them, we had multiple sets of them arrive. So, you know, over the Christmas period, we had a conversation with my brothers similar to you. If I'm honest with you, Diana, we didn't really act quick enough. So we just left it a little bit because we weren't quite sure how to approach my mum. And then fast forward probably to the March time, March, April time, our gardeners were still doing the garden for my house and my mum and dad's house, and his wife phoned up and said, your mum's transferred 10 transactions of the same amount into our account. And then we started unpicking stuff, and then she'd ordered 10 sets of the same dining furniture for outside, you know, the kind of like outside sets. And so that was really the time when we sat down as a family and said, we do need to have a conversation. But as we both know, that's not just a one-off conversation. Just even trying to approach it, she got angry with us. She denied that anything was wrong. You could see she was scared. There was like slight cracks a little bit where she did say that she was feeling vulnerable, but then she'd snap out of it. And so then went on probably 18 months of us trying to get her officially accepting and diagnosed, and then trying to get her onto the meds, which was a really tough journey actually.
And I think for both of us, potentially, the whole lockdown situation sort of in part masked it, so it made it complicated because GPs weren't seeing people face to face, but also in my mum's case, she was blaming lockdown, that she'd lost her social life. So, you know, she used to go to aerobics, lunch club, girly lunch, you know, there was something happening just about every day of the week. And, you know, she had a great friendship group and suddenly that was lost. So she was blaming it. She came up with this, I think it was called memory fog, caused, she read it in the Telegraph, caused by lack of social contact during lockdown. And so she used that as an excuse for a long time. But, you know, I knew in my heart of hearts that it was dementia.
So, and similar to us, you know, I remember sitting down with my dad and actually us questioning whether it was dementia because, you know, she stopped caring for my little girl because we weren't allowed to have split settings. She stopped going to church because she was an avid churchgoer, stopped playing tennis, stopped going to Manchester United football games and stopped seeing her friends. And so naturally, you know, my mum would think that would affected her. And as a family, we were trying to think, well, is lockdown actually what's going on here? But then, you know, you start to see things progressively get worse, not get better, which you would hope, you know, the result of lockdown would have been really.
Yeah, and we, with my mum, the other thing that happened is we had a number of episodes where she would ring in the morning saying she felt terribly ill, and she sounded so ill. I mean, the one time that I went, and she was 2 hours away, I honestly thought I would find her dead because she sounded so desperate and so ill. And she was saying, I've never felt like this, I feel so awful. So I, you know, drove over and I get there and she's sitting up in the lounge in a dressing gown feeling a bit better but still unwell. Yeah. No, she knew she'd rung me, but she was feeling better. And then a few weeks later she rang my brother who was 5 hours away and I couldn't go, so he had to go. And it was on the third episode of that happening and us in amongst those visits, we had taken her to the GP to try and get this diagnosis. You know, that's when in the September I just said to her, look, I think, how about moving to Cheshire? And I was expecting, you know, this independent woman to say to me, no way, I'm staying here. But she just sort of like, yeah, I'd love to do that. You know, so that was in the September, and by December she'd moved over to Cheshire. So when you say that, you know, you found it difficult to act quickly, is that something that you reflect on now?
It is. So when we first spoke to the doctor, they were wanting to do an assessment over the phone with her. Well, this is a person that is denying anything is wrong, so we weren't able to really do anything with her own GP. And eventually we found a private GP who was able to refer us to a psychologist to do an assessment. But we're now talking like 9 months on, and even just trying to get her to go to that, she had to get assessed twice. The first time, you know, the grief that she gave me and my brother in the car was something else. And so you then didn't do anything because you knew she was resistant to it. And in hindsight, really, if we'd have been able to be, I guess, equipped better to have the conversation, know how to deal with the reaction, I do wonder if we'd have got her on the meds earlier, would that have made a difference to where we are today? But really, it was 18 months from the start of us in that 2019 point to when we actually got her on some settled meds, that we kind of were able to hopefully see a difference.
And did you see a difference?
Sadly, I think it was too late. My mum was diagnosed with mixed dementia, but primarily vascular dementia. So with vascular dementia, it's clear step downs. Her blood pressure is the thing that's caused the issue. And so, you know, not only was she not really having the meds for dementia, we were struggling to get her to take the meds for her other conditions, diabetes. She's pre-diabetic and she had blood pressure. And so those two things combined meant that she probably spiralled much quicker than really she should have done. So with your mum's official diagnosis, how did you feel and how have you changed since then?
I think when we got the diagnosis, so that was following a brain scan, and similar to your mother, vascular dementia. My mum has had high blood pressure for a long time, so she's officially diagnosed as vascular with Alzheimer's. I think I was just relieved because it was so frustrating, the process of getting that, the diagnosis and getting the brain scan. I think I was just relieved and in a way pleased, because I felt we could then get her on the meds, because the little knowledge I had about medication was that for some sort of dementia, medication would slow it down. So, and that's what that was the steady drumbeat I'd been trying to deliver to my mother for the 2 years running up to it, was look, if there is something wrong, we need to get a diagnosis because there are treatments that will slow down the progression. And because, like you, we didn't manage to get that diagnosis quickly, despite our best efforts. I think I was just pleased, because I'm the type of person that I can deal with anything if I know what I'm dealing with. What I hate is the unknown. So we'd had this period of kind of, you know, some things, you think you know what's wrong, but you haven't got confirmation, so you can't actually then put anything in place. So I think once you had that diagnosis, and like you say with vascular, you get these steps where you like almost overnight, you see a difference in their behaviour and their cognitive ability. So I just felt, well, we can get on with some sort of treatment, but like you, it was just too late.
My role has changed as her dementia has progressed. So as you know, my mum is non-verbal now. She's 24/7 care, which means that there's somebody else looking after her. So that's allowing me to be a daughter again. But that's really been only in the last 9 months that we've been there. Previous to that, I was her carer. She thought I was a hairdresser for a while. We obviously lost her a couple of times because she went walking without purpose and we had to have the police out. So, you know, that changes your, I guess, whole kind of character and personality when you're thinking about your mum, because the person that has protected you and looked after you, you're now looking out on the streets with your family. My own little girl, who's 6 at the time, looking for her grandma. And so it's definitely changed us as a family. It's changed my father, it's changed my brothers. But I think for us, we've learned that our roles have adapted with her progression of dementia. It wasn't just from one, yes, everything's okay, to where we are today. It's just been a huge roller coaster, and I'm sure you felt like that as well with different events that happen.
I think mine is different in that my mum is definitely progressing. It's not as rapid, and we're not, you know, obviously my mum is still, she's living independently with support. She has care visits from home instead 3 times a week. I think from my own personal point of view, I just feel I think I've mentioned it to you before. When my father was diagnosed with cancer, I was in floods of tears every day, pretty much 24/7. And it was a terminal diagnosis, so you know that's very upsetting. But I know that Mum is not going to get any better, but I don't feel as emotional about it because I think I'm so busy dealing with it. So every day I'm just dealing with stuff to do with it, you know, whether it's, you know, because she can't now remember where the GP is. You know, it's at the end of her road, the optician's at the end of her road. So if she's going anywhere, I have to either take her, which is, you know, she took me to all those riding lessons and tennis and all over. So, you know, this is her turn now, or my turn to do something for her. But I just feel like I'm dealing with it on a practical level, which is slightly concerning because the emotional side of it isn't there. I think just because there's so many practicalities to deal with, so much stuff.
I think one of the things that, and I'm not just going to talk about me now, I'm going to talk about my family. And just the other day, Justin, my husband, he was hit with it. I think you kind of have moments where we're dealing with the practicalities of it, and then you actually just take stock and, you know, you look at my mum and, you know, you realise that she's not your mum anymore. And Justin was kind of like, you kind of go on the roller coaster of dealing with stuff, but every now and then it does hit you. And I know that's the same for Sophia, my little girl as well, you know, she has seen her grandma progressively become very different and not her grandma anymore. And I think for all of us, it does definitely come in waves. That would be how I'd describe it. Now, so we hit crisis point last October. She was she went to hospital, admitted to hospital, and we were told she was end of life, and we had to go and sit with her while she was prescribed lots of medication because she had a UTI, which was caused because she wasn't looking after herself properly. And then out of that crisis, she was discharged and put into a care home, which was, for us as a family, was just not what we wanted. And so I guess we were then working with Home Instead to think about how we could have her back at home with living care. And so my role now is very different to your role. I've been where you are, where you're doing everything. My role now is making sure that the care that's being delivered 24/7 through living care is actually going well. But I generally can be a daughter again. You know, I don't have to do the personal care that I had to do for 2 years, and I don't, you know, I quite like pretending to be the hairdresser, but you know, all that kind of stuff has been taken off me and my family, which is a weird place because, you know, you also then feel not needed anymore, and you've got to then put your trust in somebody else to do it. But I guess for you, you're much earlier on in your journey of needing to do things, and I guess in line with what Home Instead are doing as well.
Yeah, I mean, around the house she won't let me do anything, so she's very aware that there's something wrong. I'm not sure she's aware anymore that it's a dementia, even though she knows. Well, at some point she was told that. So if I try and do anything around the house, or if I arrive and, you know, what she's wearing is not appropriate for the weather, or has got coffee and food down the front, you know, this is a woman that was used to beautiful clothes, and I suggest, you know, washing something or that she gets changed, she gets very angry, and then half an hour later we'll be out walking the dogs and she's too hot, and you know, it's like you have to bite your tongue to say, well, I did tell you not to wear that jumper, you know, the sun's shining. So it's just, you know, it's just kind of frustrating. So I don't deliver any personal care. I'm barely allowed to help her around the house, but occasionally I do organise a situation where either my husband or my daughter takes her out, and I'll quickly whiz round with the hoover or clean the kitchen or put some washing on, and then she finds the washing in the washing machine and thinks that she's done it, you know, so I get away with it.
Isn't it funny both? So my mum was exactly the same. When we first started care, I had to introduce the care professional as a friend. And so the care professional, my friend, would say, I'm just going to pop to the bathroom, and we'd leave the cleaning equipment in the bathroom, and we'd get her to clean the bathroom for us, or wherever else in the house, because my mum didn't want to let go of that independence. That was something that she was always so very house proud. And the idea of somebody coming in and cleaning her house for her was just, it just wasn't registering at all for her.
But you see, if I go upstairs and I'm gone longer than she thinks I should be gone, she's like coming up the stairs after me. Diana, what are you doing up there? And I'm like, and I have to think very quickly on my feet as to what am I doing. But yeah, so I just have you just have to turn a blind eye to it, which also isn't very pleasant. You know, if you go in and the kitchen's dirty, she just won't let me clean it.